what we are trying during all these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind.
You're here at our February K lecture, and you might be wondering, what is K lecture? What does K stand for? So K comes from Krishnamurti. He was a great philosopher, and actually on your right, the first image, and his philosophy emphasis on a certain mindset is to be critical, self-inquiry, and discerning. So K lecture is a platform to discuss a difficult idea, to push boundary of critical and global issue. We hold K lecture monthly at the end of every month, and each K lecture we invite different experts to share their thoughts and their ideas. Before I get to the actual evening, let me quickly do some housekeeping rules. Phone, please make sure that you put them on silent, and you're welcome to take some pictures. And just so you know that this event is being recorded and in a few weeks' time will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Toilets, the door on your right, and turn another right, one stay up for women and two stay up for men. Today, we are not expecting any fire alarm, so in the case there is one, is it real? And within that, please follow our team and they will guide you out. And let's get to the actual evening. This K lecture, as the flyer has suggested and brought you here, is on interfaith dialogue and social cohesion, past, present, and future. We will revisit and reflect on the 3 decades of interfaith dialogue. And we're having 3 excellent speakers to help us think this through. Next to me is Professor Opinderjit Takhar. She is a professor of faith and public engagement at the University of Wolverhampton. She is also the director of the Center for Sikh and Punjab Studies, and she was a president of Theology and Religious Studies UK in 2022. This is an umbrella body for all university departments on theology and religious studies. We are also joined by Rev Rana Youab Khan, an Anglican priest and Christian leader. He advised the Archbishop of Canterbury to support the Anglicans' communion on interfaith dialogue. He also sits on the board directors of KAICIT, the International Center for Interreligious Dialogue. Lastly, Riaz Ravat. He is the Deputy Director of the St. Philip's Center, Leicester-based Interfaith and Community Organization, and he holds extensive experience across local, national, and international interfaith engagement, including public sector, workforce development, and national policy in partnership with Home Office. So together, we have a well-rounded view of interfaith and social cohesion in the UK, spanning from the academic and secular analysis, the theological and institutional leadership at the international level, and also frontline community delivery and policy practice. So I want to set up some context before we jump into the conversation. I believe that most people here would probably agree on the original rationale of interfaith dialogue, that it developed as a practical response toward an increasing religious diversity in the UK, and with an aim to strengthen social cohesion and deepen mutual understanding. However, when we look at the context around us now, we continue to see the elevated levels of religious hate crime. So in 2023, there was around 6,500 cases on religious hate. And last year, it jumped to 10,000 cases. We have witnessed the moment of community tensions, including the Leicester unrest in 2022, and the increasingly intense debate on immigrations and national identity. Alongside this, we also seen the closure of Interfaith Network, the UK long-standing national umbrella body. So taking these together, these developments raise the legitimate question, I would say, around, is interfaith still fit for purpose? And if it is, how does it need to evolve to meet the challenge we are now facing? And that's what we will explore this evening together. And let me now open the conversation to our panelists, and I will invite each of you to share your story around 5 minutes, starting briefly from your own journey into interfaith. And what does interfaith mean in practice from where you sit? And also, where have you seen it make a tangible difference? So, Opinderjit, may I start with you?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so if I was to kind of explain my journey as to how I got involved in interfaith dialogue, I would say it very much started from when I was studying at school myself. So growing up in the Swansea Valleys, which is a very small village in the middle of nowhere in Wales, myself, my siblings, we were the only diversity for probably a 30-mile radius. And I don't come from a particularly religious family either. So at school, whenever the teacher wanted to know about what the Hindus or what the Sikhs do, they would always turn to me and my sister. And to be honest with you, we made absolutely anything up. So there's probably this whole generation of people my age that have grown up with this really kind of fanciful, very mythical idea of what we do behind closed doors. But then there was a point in my life when I thought, well, actually, I identify as a Sikh, I identify as a British Sikh, but I don't, other than not cutting my hair or not being able to wash my hair on certain days of the week, I don't really know what it means. And as I said, our family isn't particularly religious, so there was really nobody there. There was no Gurdwara in Swansea at that time. And so that made me really inquisitive about learning more about my own faith, but also learning about other faiths as well. So I went to university, I studied religious studies, went on to do a master's in Indian religion, speciality in Sanskrit, which is one of the hardest things I've ever done, ever. And then my PhD actually focused on Sikh identity. And from that, there was a real realization to me that actually there isn't much talk about who the Sikhs are in the UK. In India, we are a minority. Here in the UK, we are still a minority, although we are the 5th largest faith now. There were still so many stereotypes about who the Sikhs are. Being a Sikh is more, than kind of the physical representation, the stereotypical representation of a Sikh. And so, I started to do some work with the BBC, where I started consulting on Sikh-related stories, etc. And from that, I really got involved in interfaith dialogue, primarily through Nottingham, where we used to live, and then at Wolverhampton, and then with various other kind of interfaith councils. Working at Wolverhampton was actually a great opportunity for me. Those of you who know the dynamics of Wolverhampton will know that that is where Enoch Powell gave his Rivers of Blood speech, which gave rise to interfaith dialogue in the UK. And Wolverhampton actually was one of the very first cities to form the Interfaith Council. And my PhD supervisor, Dr. Owen Cole, was actually one of the pioneers in interfaith studies as well. So that's how I got into the whole interfaith scene, as it were.
Yeah, thank you. Rana?
I think it's difficult to start because I grew up in Pakistan, born and brought up in a small town near Multan. In our area, there was not a good school, and that was the time I'm talking about when I was young, about 40 years ago. All good schools in Pakistan were church schools, or most good schools were church schools. So my father, I was the only son, only child, if you like, with 2 elder siblings. He sent me to live with my distant relatives 500 miles away, so I could go to a good church school. I had no interest in living with the uncles, so I started losing interest in studies. So with a permissive will, he brought me back. Apparently, I destroyed his plan. So the local imam of the mosque was a very good friend of my father. Though I come from a Christian family, my great-grandfather became Christian from Muslim background, but we had very good relations with Christian and Muslims in the town. So he said to my dad, "What happened with your son? He used to live with your brothers." He said, "He's unfortunate. I sent him to a very good church school, and he's not interested. I don't know what I'll do with him. And Imam Sahab said, he said, I wish if there was a church school in our town, I will send my children there. He's unfortunate. And then he suggested to my dad, why don't you send him to our mosque school? So that was a sort of a punishment plan. So why don't you send him to a mosque school? Within a week he will decide to go back. So, and the Imam and other teachers in the school, they were very kind, a little primary school with potential Imams. They all will do just their primary and that's the end. But my father had great plans for me. And then I thought that's a good place because no homework, no uniform, no school fee. And they were very kind. They thought it's the first Christian ever. In this, it's a school, a government school, a secular school. This was a school attached with a mosque, which means it was a madrasa. Why a Christian would go there and why they would expect a Christian to come. So that worked very well. I finished my primary with potential Imam without knowing one day I will be a priest. I destroyed my father's plan, but now I think I fulfilled my heavenly father's plans. So when I go to a mosque, when I meet with people of other faiths, I'm very confident and feel at home. I had no idea one day I will be advisor to the Bishop of Lahore in Pakistan, or there will be a time when I will be advisor to the Archbishop of Canterbury in London. So anyway, things worked. I just want to briefly say, when I went to seminary and learned more about religion, I don't think interfaith dialogue, maybe in terms of terms and its TOR and in its modern understanding, it may be a new initiative because of the change of the political situation and the shift of people from some parts of the world to another parts of the world, and Europe and the Western Hemisphere, they became more multicultural and multi-religious, and some people thought, oh, there is a need for community cohesion. But I, as a Christian, very strongly believe there is a deep theological foundation in Christianity for interfaith dialogue. Jesus himself, for example, I will just give you an example and I'll conclude it. Jesus never talked, not a single time, about people of other faiths who existed in Palestine in Jesus' time. For example, you may have heard about a story, Good Samaritan. And Samaritans were taken as bad people in Jesus' time, but he always talked positive about them, about their religion, about their social persona, about their interaction with Jews and all that. And of course, there is not a single statement in Jesus' teaching where you can find, oh, you need to be careful when you are meeting with people of other faith or people of other faith because they carry the wrong theology, that's why they can be bad people. Nothing like that. That's why the Second Council of Vatican in 1965, there was a document, and it is called Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate simply means your interaction with people of other faiths. So interreligious dialogue in the church was never instigated or brought by the world political social institutes. Church always felt, but there are always reservations and there were always different views. I am among those people who very strongly believe, and I'm very happy that now there is more awareness in the Church of England and in other churches, and many institutions are very actively involved in community cohesion. And then finally, I would like to thank International Institute for Sustainability for bringing us all together here, just by creating space where people can talk to each other, people can listen, people can share their views. I have traveled a lot in different parts of the world in very hostile situation, born and brought up and worked as a priest in Pakistan, where religious minorities, especially Christians, sometimes feel beleaguered or persecuted and not treated fairly. But at the same time, I'm patron of Tel Mama and many other organizations who work for Islamophobia and also work for other minority rights in the United Kingdom. I think if interfaith dialogue to me is probably one of those great initiatives supported by many religions and governments where people have ability to speak for others and also to move on where they are, to journey into the otherness. And once you know that, actually the person who was different from me and his outlook and theology was actually the person whom I had to speak before.
Thank you. Riaz, please.
Thank you. Good evening, friends, colleagues. Very pleased to be here. Can I just again add my thanks to the Centre for this wonderful welcome. I've described it as the best airport lounge I've ever walked into. Not that I've been to many, I'm not paid that much, but anyway, it's a magnificent place and I pay tribute to the work of the entity, and I hope, I wish you all the best for your second birthday, which comes up in April. So I had three ambitions in life when I was younger. I've sadly failed on two of them, and it was in that order. The first one was to play for my beloved Liverpool. Second was to manage them. So I had it all laid out. I have failed badly on those two fronts. But the third one was to work in a field where I could bring people together. And being brought up in Leicester, a city which, of course, has been in the news for the wrong reasons in more recent years. But going back to the childhood that I had, my schooling was with primarily South Asian colleagues of mine. Mostly Hindu, mostly Sikh, and of course Muslim as well within there. But it was only when I attended college that I began to see the world around me, that at that time, for the first time, I had friends, meaningful friends, and exposure to people who were from the Caribbean community and people who were white. Up until that point, I was in a cocoon, very comfortable one, and we got on reasonably well. But we never had the camaraderie and the relationships which could actually deepen the benefits to society if we were to remain in that way. So I was very fortunate that my opportunities through the education system gave me that exposure. And if I look back now, we need to create more arenas where that interaction and that encounter can happen. And in many ways, for example, my old schools have become much more monocultural, mono-religious now. And so I think it's become narrower, and there are some structural deficiencies that we have in a way that we didn't have before. Leicester built its reputation largely on, I mean, it's described as historically a term which is largely seen as outdated now, multiculturalism. And that was primarily driven by those who came from East Africa, my family being an example of that, where Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania, Uganda, of course, the principal one as well. So communities that were originally from India, moved over to parts of Africa, lived as minorities alongside one another in Africa, and then came over to the UK. And that connectedness was in sharp contrast to some of our towns and cities, perhaps in the north, where that familiarity wasn't there. You were a majority back in your homeland, and then you arrived in the UK, and this is a strange and new place. But what people of that generation that moved to Leicester often talk about, and they romanticize about this, and I mean that in a genuine way, that they had those friendships. You hear about celebrating festivals across the divides. You hear about going into each other's homes. You hear about the jokes and the parties and all the stuff that went on back in Africa, which they brought over to the UK. But what we didn't realize was, as we were getting older and older, children, grandchildren, and others were being formed, they weren't having the same experience. And that's the predicament that I think we have in the city right now, that shared journey, those shared values, we're having to forge them. Where do we forge them? How do we forge those? And so when my first two ambitions passed me by in life, the third one was when, so after leaving university, I worked in Leicester for a short while. I then worked in Birmingham for a short period, working on a European Social Fund project. And it was very much bureaucratic, so visiting various parts of the country, meeting people, but not really doing anything to gel them. It was much more of a desk job. And fast forward, the breakthrough came, certainly for the job I do now at the St Philip's Centre, was in 2002 when I was employed by the Diocese of Leicester. Let's try and work out that narrative. A Christian organisation employing somebody who is Muslim. How does that work? The world tells you that shouldn't happen. That job was done for 2 years, and what I did there was to map the social contribution made by faith communities to Leicester. In other words, apart from prayer, what do they do? And at the time, the stats were quite staggering in terms of volunteers and volunteer hours. Faith communities, through luncheon clubs, through preschool activities, were saving the Exchequer an absolute fortune. It was just over £1 million back then. Volunteer activity done day in, day out because of a greater goal. And then I left after a couple of years, joined the health service, and then returned to St Philip's Centre, where I've been since 2008. And I see it as a real beauty that I happen to work for a Christian-rooted interfaith organisation. My colleague, who I was talking to others about earlier on, who works in education, Ramila, is Hindu by background. It is the norm. This is a Christian organization that is showing the hand of friendship and hospitality to others, and it's complicating the narrative. And we look at the volunteers that we have. We can't do our work. This organization with a Christian heritage cannot do its work if it doesn't have colleagues from other faith communities. 98% of our work would wipe out instantly. And so colleagues from the Sikh, the pagans, the humanists, they are all part and parcel of the journey that we undertake. And I'm very fortunate in that I've never had 2 days the same at the centre. That on the one hand, we've been out to places like Rotherham, we've been out to places in Norfolk and Suffolk doing schools programmes. Earlier this week, we were training 23 new police officers in Leicestershire as well about how they start navigating an increasingly complex territory. The fire service and many others. I'm very fortunate I have the ability to meet lots of people and learn and grow. And I would say that I've learned more about my own identity by meeting others, by engaging with others, than textbook or the upbringing that I had when I was younger. So critical thinking, I think, is key. I think it's absolutely vital that we encourage people to think critically. How do we learn to disagree well, I think, is another challenge of our time, that it's my way or the highway, and we're finding that discourse particularly challenging. And thinking of creative and innovative ideas to bring people into the tent. I am not downplaying the value of formal interfaith. I think there's a value in there, there's an aspect of it which works, but we need to move beyond the club and create a consortium. And the consortium may not be sitting in a meeting. That may be the dialogue takes place at the school gates, it takes place on the football terraces, it takes place in lots of arenas where people have the flexibility to engage with difference. And it's only through that, through the creativity, that I think there is some element of hope in there. And I would like to talk about one particular initiative to show how the creativeness works at St Philip's Centre. Who has heard of that Channel 4 programme, Come Dine With Me? Yep. The jokes are bad and the food is good, or the other way around, yeah? Something like that. Complete chaos, if it works. We piloted that initiative in Leicester with faith communities. We got a pagan going into a Muslim home or a Hindu going into a Jewish home, and vice versa. If it was a disaster, I would book annual leave instantly, make sure I wasn't there to pick up the pieces. But I have to say, it worked remarkably well. And where there were some anxieties, we encouraged them to go to a neutral venue. Having somebody in your home is a big deal, I absolutely get that. But we tried those initiatives out, and then we developed that further by encouraging the police to go into the homes of, again, people from faith communities. As long as you told your neighbours there's no dodgy thing happening here with the police coming into our homes, the armed forces and others too. So we made sure that outside of formal interfaith training and education, that the informality has a space. And the informality is where it could be warts and all, you get under the skin of issues and you form relationships which then hopefully will last a lot longer. And thankfully, initiatives like Come Dine Together, we had to think of a different name, otherwise Channel 4 would have us in the dock, so to speak. But that encouraged those friendships to sustain themselves over the long term. So creativity is something that we do quite a bit. The other point I will mention about our schools work, and I think it is worth mentioning, we have something called a Religion and Belief Roadshow. Again, it's our flagship offer where we have colleagues who wake up very, very early. Colleagues from the faith communities wake up early. I won't tell you what time they wake up. They keep reminding me 5 o'clock is not a suitable time to wake up. Anyway, they jump onto a minibus with food, clothing, artifacts. They go into a school and they have a festival. And it is a festival, and it's toward the East Midlands, the West Midlands, South Yorkshire, the East of England. It's a very different way of connecting with people, and particularly young people. And they get an opportunity to hear from others who they've never, of course, engaged with before. But then I guess there are some powerful encounters in there. We've heard of Judaism, but we'd never spoken to a Jew before. Is there something called the Jain faith? Is there something called the Baha'i faith? Oh, we now know that. So that exposure brings non-Abrahamic faiths as well as the established ones into the tent. And I think there's a powerful aspect of that we, in the interfaith world, have a big responsibility to make sure we cast the net as wide as we can.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now let's turn to the current context, the current challenge that we are facing. As we have noted, we are now operating in a very different environment that's shaped by the deeper social polarization and digital echo chamber, and identity politics, global conflicts that easily turned into local communities one. So in that climate, it brings to the questions on, to put it simply, that can interfaith save us? So are they too small at scale or too slow for current challenge? And can it really make difference? And if so, how? So Riaz, a question for you is, from your experience on the ground in Leicester, what have you seen that interfaith able to do for the community cohesions? In the sense that it helps, you will see the difference when we have some tensions around the communities and now it's become better. And also where it's still stuck. And in your view, where should the next level of action look like?
Okay. There are enough gaps in the interfaith world. There are plenty of gaps. Communities that haven't been reached. I would say some of the challenges are some of our white outer estates. We've developed a piece of work in Leicester where we are engaging with some of those communities which are outside the pale. So they wouldn't be church going. There are those who may not necessarily be connected to any of those formal structures. And we've been quite fortunate that we've connected them through just friendships. And I think friendships over formality is a simple way in which you can do this. Not necessarily encouraging people to go to a meeting per se. And I know Interfaith Dialogue, I've said this before, there are structures and there's an interest there for some, but it's not going to be universal. It's not going to be universal. A lot of people need different ways in which they can have that encounter. So thinking of different partnerships which allow us to do that. We've done a lot of work with sporting clubs. We find sport is quite a good way of connecting people. Creating those arenas of mixing and dialogue. The benefits, I think there are huge. I think there are significant benefits if we get this right. And the benefits not only can encourage and support our public sector organizations, for example, who are often on the front line when things go wrong, to have that stronger literacy of how to work through communities. But I think there's a greater need that we can enrich the world of interfaith by exploring and encouraging the exploring of religious plurality. Again, if I go back to when I was younger, it was very much a one-size-fits-all aspect of different religions and beliefs. Now we see intra-faith arguably is more challenging than interfaith.
Yes.
You've got so much diversity and so many denominations that have come through now. So let's look to some of those aspects. Let's try and broaden and deepen the reach that we have by encouraging those marginal voices to come to the fore. So I think one of the things we can do is be a lot more inclusive than where we are now. Because I still think this club mentality, yes, admittedly it has some value and has served us for 30 years or so. We're in a different landscape now, and we've got to have the tools to engage with the society as it is now, whilst learning the lessons of what happened before.
Brilliant, brilliant. And a question for you, Rana. So now we'll be looking, I would say, like one step back at the international level, because sometimes when we look at UK context, we are surrounded by our challenges. But now when we step away with the international lens, I would say. So I wonder that what this kind of experience look like outside UK. So and what do the effective interfaith responses look like that's come from the major religious institutions or the international organization that work on how global conflict can flip into the local communities, how they work around there, what the interfaith looks like outside UK?
I think after working for a long time in this interfaith world, to some extent I sometimes think most people who are involved with interfaith work, either they are confused or many of these people don't know the understanding of local context. And our context is dramatically changing very fastly because of internet and all that. So it's not easy to say another side of the pool, because people either on Facebook or social media, they have friends everywhere in the world. They don't meet with each other, but they don't know who their neighbors are. And sometimes they don't want to know, especially in big cities, the neighbors are. And many people, small faith communities, big faith communities, they meet with the group of people with whom they have some sort of cultural or social connections or faith connections, and they live in different part of the capital. London is a very good and bad example of that. When I was in London, my wife and I, we used to meet with a lot of groups. I was on the staff in the Church of England situation, but also I used to go as a priest in our local parish, where I shared my faith with the white British Londoners. But at the same time, on a Sunday evening, we used to go to Tooting because of the taste of our buds. So this is how the context is. Because if you have moved to the United Kingdom from another part of the world, you bring your identity, you bring your culture, you bring a lot of things around. But at the same time, either it doesn't matter if you are welcomed or not. I'm just mentioning. So you come to this part of the world and you see many people who have the same background, and then you create your own little ghetto within that big community, and that is where the cohesion thing, the challenge arrives. So in one way they meet with people, but they meet with those people where they feel comfortable. It's again the taste of the bud and culture and language and music and so on and so on. The international side is in the same way. Someone in a small part in Africa or another part of the world may think all these white British they are Christians because their names are John and Charles. That's why they are Christian. Or when you go to London, you see hundreds of churches. So basically, these churches are empty. Some churches are going to the market to be sold. But the general perception that West is Christian, and India is Hindu, Punjab is Sikh, Pakistan is Muslim, and Muscat and Bahrain, they are, I think so to some extent we need to come out of this understanding. It's not real. It used to be, but it's not real. And now when people see me, they say, are you from Pakistan? I said, yes, I am. Are you Christian? Never heard. But when we are in Pakistan, Pakistani Christians are 2%, which means you are talking about 3 million people, nearly the size of the population of Wales.
And would you say that would you say that this issue also happened like not only in the UK but in Europe, that people have the similar mindset that they tie a person from there where they come from plus they're religious? The challenge that we have, like that you mentioned in London, people coming in and people have their assumptions. Are there also something happen the same pattern in Europe or in Pakistan?
Yes, now it happens. But just I would like to briefly take you back a little bit from where this idea of ism and identity came. When I say identity, Christianity or Islamism or Hinduism. I don't think Sikh, for example, living in Punjab 200 years ago, they ever thought we belong to Sikhism. This idea of ism is always someone who doesn't know the situation. So they were basically the British who went everywhere in the world and they told the Punjabis, you are Sikh. They told someone else in India, you are actually Hindu. Do you have books like we have books? So basically to understand others, you only understand others in your own identity. So why we all think we are humans? Because we have 2 legs, we walk, we speak, we have hair, we have 2 eyes. Why don't I think, sorry to say, my wife is there, I can only mention her. This person holding the camera has come from moon or from another planet. No. So 8 billion people, we all think we are Homo sapiens and we are humans and we are this and that. So the same happens at a micro level with religion. This is again a Western understanding which needs to be challenged gently. Don't put people in boxes. People have never lived in boxes in other parts of the world. But now these boxes are very strong. They have become moved from boxes to cages. So people are confined in these boxes. And but the more people are, and the same is, for example, it might possible. Reza mentioned about intrafaith challenges. For example, not all those people who call themselves Muslims, they are same Muslims. All those people who come, we are Hindus, they are same Hindus. But from a Western Christian point of view or from a Western secular point of view, we have made boxes, put people in these boxes, gave them identity, not because they can understand themselves well, but we can understand them well. So that is the challenge. And I think in the international interfaith work, people should have opportunity, people should have a chance to explain themselves who you are. And how you explain yourself about your identity, about your about your religion, about your faith.
Yes.
But another serious challenge is in the West, but not especially for those who in other parts of the world. I don't know what is the percentage, but in 2013 census, more than 24% people said we have no faith in the United Kingdom. So you're not talking about the community cohesion based on faith. You have people who have faith background and those people who have no faith. Those who believe in God, and then within those who believe in different sort of God. They have Trinity, they have Islamic understanding of God, they believe in polytheism and monotheism and all. And then there are people who say, sorry, hang on, we don't believe in God. But this context may be alien for people who come from Middle East, who come from places like Pakistan and many other African and Indian contexts. So a significant amount of people who are intellectually convinced and they are very passionate about it. We need to tell to the world, like Richard Dawkins and many others, we need to tell to the world that God doesn't exist, it's not real. But then this is our context. I think in international side, we try to help people to understand when you think about us who live in the United Kingdom, either we are Christian or Muslims. No, there are different sort of people who are absolutely on different experiments. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And a question for you, Opinderjit, that as the global conflicts, as I mentioned many times already, that they play out within local communities very quickly, and particularly in campus and school, would say, and where the youth we see now, they are more exposed by and exposed to and affected by a lot of online polarization. What do you think, like, the roles of educational institution can play to strengthening or perhaps rethinking the interfaith engagement?
Yeah, so just before I answer that, I just wanted to go back to the point about the isms that were just brought up a couple of minutes ago. So within the so-called Dharmic faith, so those which developed and had different formations on Indian soil, that's what we mean by the Dharmic faith. There's a real effort at the moment to move away from the whole ism of those faiths, because when we talk about a faith being an ism, it's very much about that kind of stereotypical list of do's and don'ts. But as we know, within the Indian context, faiths are an identity. They are something that's lived 24/7. And so if I talk about the Sikh faith here, there is a real effort towards totally abandoning the ism, which is an effect of colonialization. So the growing preference is to use the term Sikhi, which means a way of life, and the same for the Hindu Dharam, and the same for the Buddhist and the Jains, etc. And so when we come back to your question then, Ornicha, about, how do we address this in schools? Again, a few years ago, within religious studies departments at universities, but schools also, there was very much this kind of talk about getting away from the world paradigms. From the world religions paradigms. And that is where, again, we come back to, when the British were in India, they started those census of people's faiths and beliefs. And it's from there that all of them got boxed in. And those fuzzy boundaries, which very much operate within the Indian context, were there was almost this effort to try and get rid of those people who sat on those fuzzy boundaries. And we know that within the Indian context of faith and belief, that actually doesn't work, because we have Indians who are, who absolutely comfortably would define themselves as, maybe Hindu, maybe Buddhist, maybe Sikh, Ravidasiya, Valmiki, Namtari, etc., all within that context. But when we're talking about the British, or more so the colonial attitude towards this, that doesn't make sense. And hence in schools then, that then gets translated into, today are we going to study the Hindus, the Buddhists, etc., etc. And so prior to teaching at university, I was the head of a secondary school where I really played with this whole concept of how do we have these youngsters fit for the real world. The school I taught in was a very kind of BMP strong area. Very, very kind of, no diversity in that area at all. So the very first RE lesson that I taught, I got the kids to, think critically. When we're talking about religion in schools, it's very much about developing their critical analysis skills. So my first lesson in that school was getting the children to think about, come on, let's think about this properly. Jesus, blonde hair, blue eyes, spoke English, did this really, and the kids actually came into the classroom believing this because this is what was taught to them by their parents. The number of complaints that the head teacher got that evening when the kids had gone home and they told their parents, this teacher, this brown woman in our school is telling us that Jesus was not white, But then, luckily, what I had on my side was a very understanding head teacher who said, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to develop our youngsters into critically kind of, youngsters who can really assess the world from their own positionality, but also understand the views of others. And so what he did, he said to those parents, if anybody's got an issue with this, please do come into school, let's have an open meeting about this. Nobody actually turned up. And later on that year, it was the first time in that school that we taught anything other than Christianity. And the kids absolutely loved it. And so again, when we go back to how do we engage in kind of developing youngsters for the next generation, it's very much about having those dialogues. And it's very much about really analysing and really kind of, kind of critically looking at what do we mean by this term tolerant. Personally, I find it a horrible term. If we say to somebody, be tolerant of others, it means I have to put up with you because you're different to me. If we replace that term tolerance with respect, with understanding, this is where we encourage those children. Okay, go and talk to that individual. Go and ask them why they wear a turban, for example. Go and ask them, why Friday is a holy day for them. Don't just base your ideas on assumptions which come from somewhere. And very often they come from the family, they come from your upbringing. But they also come from media as well. And this is what we're seeing at the moment. And unfortunately, religious studies in schools, it's still not part of the national curriculum, although we've been lobbying this now ever since I can remember. Currently, there is an effort at the moment, which is known as the national standards, where there may be a possibility that actually religious education or RE in schools becomes recognised in the national curriculum. But I'm very much at the forefront with my previous, President of Theology and Religious Studies hat on, to rebrand religious studies in school for something like religion and worldviews. Because what that does is that includes every child in the classroom. For example, if we're taking, we've got PowerPoint, this is what Jews do, this is what Christians do, Sikhs do, etc., etc. There may be that one kid in the classroom who thinks, well, actually, that's not what I do. So they then start questioning, well, am I true to my faith? What is my identity? Because identity to children is very, very important. And obviously not everybody has a faith, but rebranding it as religion and worldviews will allow those voices, will allow those children to be in brave spaces. I don't think there is any such thing as a safe space. You can never have a safe space, but what we can do through this kind of developing youngsters in schools through religion and worldviews is creating these brave spaces in which they can really speak about.
Thank you. I have some more questions to ask in the different topics, but conscious of time, we'll quickly share the question I have, and please, all of you, please keep it very short and sweet so that we have time for Q&A. So I want to talk to you next on around the architecture of the interfaiths. So when we look at the interfaith, it started from the interfaith between Christian faiths, and then to Dharmic faiths, and now we are certainly and confidently say that now it includes Sikhs, Dharmic, other Dharmic faiths, right? And on that note, and I just wonder, because some people still see that its underlying framework on interfaith still based on the Dharmic framework, and like you mentioned about the tolerance. This is a language that I come from the Dharmic tradition. Notice that this is not something that I have back home in Thailand, and I have something to share with you quickly on some image that I have. I took this picture in Thailand when I was on the public park. This is a random working space, and if you can see it from the right, the first thing you see, I will share with you, is the Guanim. So this is the Chinese Bodhisattva. And then the next slide, when we zoom in here, you can see that greenish and another Chinese god, and then Buddha, they all exist together. So I think this tells a lot about the Dharmic tradition, and just so you know that we have like 89% of 95% of Thai people are Buddhist. And there would be no more accepting ways that I can think of so far, rather than you can have all the religion same in one place. Which means that even though I have my own religion, it doesn't block me from appreciate, respect, or at times worship other religions. And this is something that I just want to put to you here, you know, and maybe we can think and reflect on what the Dharmic traditions can learn from Dharmic tradition, roughly speaking. So, again, my first questions to Rana. Short and sweet, please. And there are some, I would like to know about what are some common challenges that arise when people from Dharmic traditions when they engage with the Dharmic traditions, and what do you think it helps to make the conversation work well?
If I can quickly give you a comparison between the geographical context of Abrahamic religions and geographical context of Abrahamic religions and Dharmic religions. Dharmic religions, when we mainly talk about Indian subcontinent, and when we talk about Abrahamic religions, we talk about the Middle East. So there are more Muslims in the Indian subcontinent than the whole Islamic population in the whole Middle East. There are more Christians in the Indian subcontinent than the whole Christian population in the Middle East. So that gives you a little idea, and there is historical Jewish presence in the Indian subcontinent from the 5th BC and so on. It just gives you a little idea of the deep and profound spirituality and the open space that Indian subcontinent provided to people from Abrahamic religions. If you have any challenges going on in the Middle East, either it's the political pressure or the religious pressure on the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, come and stay here. So all sorts of things. And Christians, one of the disciples of Jesus Christ went to India and stayed there. In India, Christian faith. So basically, Indian subcontinent provided a very good space for non-Dharmic religions or non-Indian religions to come and to be flourish and grow. However, in compared to this, the geographical space for Abrahamic religions has been intolerant, if you like, even for their own faith communities from where they came, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. So all these religions emerged from the Middle East, but Middle East squeezed itself for their own babies. The context gave birth to. That is, I think, a comparison which we need to keep eye on it. Historically, all these faith had. And then, I don't know who invented this terminology, Abrahamic religion. If you call it Middle Eastern religion, then you bring in Zoroastrians into it, because the Zoroastrians, they are basically the mainstream or the root of even Abrahamic religions. When you say Abrahamic religions, you are making a point, you are only talking about Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And within Abrahamic religion is Muslims and Christians, they got the big slice. So I have, as worked for interfaith dialogue, I sometimes think when you talk about Abrahamic religions or when you talk about interfaith dialogue among the Abrahamic communities, it's mainly Christian-Muslim dialogue. Yes, I can understand there is a more need for dialogue between Christian and Muslims, Christians and Muslims and Jews, because of various political reasons and insecurities people find in the world. And they are quite big, both religions. Islam and Christianity, they both have some challenges specific to these two religions. Is they both believe in dawah and evangelism, conversion. However, Dharmic religion has less interest in that. They want to influence people spiritually, like Sikhism, for example. Their gurus, they were not extremely interested in converting people, but they were interested in the transformation of people. sorry, in its essence, Jesus was interested in transformation of people, not on the conversion of people. But Christianity in its modern form and Islam in its modern form very strongly believe in dawa, which means the conversion, and in evangelism. But then the question is where interfaith dialogue, how interfaith dialogue make a bridge between evangelism and dialogue. So you are not going out to meet with people to convert to them, you are going out to people to basically transform them and change them, how a Christian can be helpful for a Muslim to become a good Muslim. Sorry.
Thank you.
I just wanted to bring up a very quick point on that whole terminology of conversion. In the Dharmic traditions, there is no such thing as conversion. So an individual simply lives that way of life. So hence the whole dharma or dharam, as we say in Punjabi, it's when one lives a particular way of life. There is no such conversion, right? Sometimes in Sikhi, when one takes initiation or Amrit, sometimes it's interpreted as one having, kind of converted into the Sikh faith. But I want to make it very clear that there is no such concept in any of the Dharmic religions, faiths, sorry.
Lovely. I have one last question to Riaz, and then we open the question to the floor. So what's the practical approach that you see it work well in building the genuine understanding between, I would still use it now, the Dharmic tradition and Abrahamic tradition, just this time. Yeah. And what kind of work that you see it works well, and how we can scale it up?
Okay. I think it has to be multifaceted in the sense that there's a huge amount, quite rightly, on the education system, but it can't just be the education system. It has to be the workplaces, has to be in some of our communities. So again, I talk about some of the more creative ways, innovative ways in which we can broker things. And it doesn't need to always have the label of this is interfaith dialogue. It could just be humans coming together, connecting with one another. And I think that's one way in which we can try and overcome some of the anxieties over it. And Ranaji, you're absolutely right. There's an increasing part of the UK population which doesn't follow or doesn't wish to follow any particular religious code. That doesn't mean they don't have a stake in building a peaceful, cohesive society. That's in all of our interests, regardless of the background that we come from. And so I think what we have to do is have a 360 approach to this, and it's not just the responsibility of those of us who work in the sector. It happens in the workplace, it happens in our communities on a daily basis, it happens in everyday interactions. We've got to just create those arenas of encounter. I think for me that's the basic building block. I do think contact theory provides an opportunity for us to challenge some of those stereotypes and prejudices, because if we base it on our own encounter, we're more likely to, I guess, rebut some of the excesses that may come via social media and elsewhere.
Lovely, thank you. And thank you so much, all of you. And right now, times for anyone who want to have a question or give some reflections. And just somehow keeping, please raise your hand and wait for the mic. And do introduce yourself quickly and help ask your question, short and sweet. Yes. Anyone have a question? Haha, please.
Sorry.
So,
you talked about, I've got a big mouth. So you talked about contact and stuff. How much does the core epistemology and the philosophy of the religions impact interfaith? Because Opinderjit says stuff that is just core to our dharma. We don't need interfaith because we're all divine, so I can accept you as all as divine. None of you are going to hell. So my question to the Christian, the Muslim representative, how much does your epistemology and your philosophy impact on some of this conflict? Because for me, you're God sitting down there, and you're God as well.
First of all, I'm not a Muslim representative. I want to make it clear. But I agree with you. I look at the human first. For me, the work that I do and the living and the upbringing I've had is one where I try and complicate the narrative. My work, my occupation complicates the narrative. One of the things that we try and do in our work is find the golden nuggets where we do complicate the narrative. And one of the points, Opinderjit will be familiar with this as well. The Golden Temple, Harmandir Sahib in India, the foundation stones were put there by who? Yeah? Muslim, Hindu, if we're using those labels. The Prophet Muhammad again had the constitution of Medina, which gave refuge to pagan Arabs and Jews and Christians. There was the King Negus of Ethiopia as well, of Abyssinia as it was back then. Yeah, there are stories in our history, regardless of the brackets that we've been asked to sit into. The reality is we can't divorce ourselves from history within our own faiths, and all of them show connectedness. There was a moment in time where, yes, we've had conflict, and I'm not trying to deny any of those at all, but connectedness has been fundamental to all of that as well. And I would rather focus on that, because all too often I've seen those examples not being shared. I'll share one with you, share an insight with you. There were a group of 20 trainee imams that I had. They came to the centre on a training program, and I asked them the question. I thought I could probably get away with asking this question in a way others probably can't get away with. I asked them about the Constitution of Medina. I said, how many of you are aware? Bearing in mind these are trainee imams. Not one hand went up. Not one hand went up. And I said, do you know who authored that, who produced that document, which is regarded as arguably one of the foundation stones for the freedom and liberty that we see now? Again, not one hand went up. I asked the teachers, are you aware of this? Nothing at all. And it was only through that explanation where I was saying to them, this is not opinion, this is fact, this is something that happened in a moment in time. I struggled to understand why that had not been shared with them. So I think it comes down to individuals taking ownership and responsibility and inculcating those values, and those values are absolutely rooted in all of our faith. Islam is not a faith on its own. It comes from the bowels of others, yeah? There is a connectedness, there is a shared journey, and I'd rather focus on that because, yes, again, the terms, where did the terms come from? The terms have become institutionalized in more recent years, but people of the book, right across the piece, it was a continuous of the revelations that came before it. So I think some of us have to challenge those labels, and some of us have to challenge our own histories and the way in which that history is being articulated.
Thank you. Yes, one more. You would like to add?
Just quickly, if I can respond.
Yes, please.
Your question is very profound anyway, so not very easy to answer this. I think the big challenge is, for example, when you asked a question, you make a comment, which was absolutely valid comment, because I was introduced as a priest, which means I am a Christian. She was introduced as someone who can be categorized as a Sikh and a Muslim. It's absolutely valid observation, but I don't think identities, which even the identity I think this is my identity, or people think my identity, they are not multiple identity or dual identity or triple identities. They are hybrid identities. And how many layers it has, I don't know. I can be very comfortable, very, very comfortable with these three people sitting in the front, because the two of them I can confidently say they speak Punjabi, which I can speak Punjabi. We can share, I can share most of my life and things with them and wisdom than many other white Christians, because that's my, when I am Punjabi, I don't know. When I am Christian, I don't know. When I am human, I don't know. When I am liberal, I don't know. When I am conservative, I don't know. So these are, I think it depends on the context where we are, then our identity gets activated. And the second thing is, I think very briefly I can say, the whole purpose of the faith, or at least I can confidently say about Christianity, was not to establish a worldly government and not to support any nationality or tribalism. The whole idea behind was to reform the soul of an human, to make it a good human being. And that is the claim which all religion will make, either Islam or Christianity or Hinduism or Judaism. But the problem becomes when you use the power of your faith or religion to acquire power. And power corrupts, and power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think whenever you use religion to fight against your neighbors, whenever you use religion to have a control in the country, whenever you use religion, then you are making problems and bringing misinterpretations of religion and taking the religion away from its main purpose, which was to reform a soul of an individual, and finally it will have a collective impact.
Lovely, thank you. I would like to, yes, and just to ask, do you have any more questions? So the two more so maybe we can take two at the same time, please.
Hello. Yeah, thank you to the panel. Some very important points being made. I think when we think about interfaith, we know that the national body that there was is no longer. I think from what I've heard and what I agree with is that it's very multifaceted. It's multi-layered. talking about the encounter, talking about, you know, the coffee that you're having across the road doesn't need a label. At the same time, we do need a certain recognition of what is actually going on more formally as well across the country, and the lack of a central body, the lack of awareness as to what's actually happening across the country in a good way is also a problem. So I think for me, there is a great lot of work going on to create cohesion, but there's not enough awareness of that being the case. And I think what we can all do more of to bring that to the fore, to counteract a lot of the, my goodness, how broken is society narrative. It is there's no doubt, there is friction, there is things, but actually there's a lot of people trying to do things to mend that, but we don't see it, we don't feel it. And we forget that, yeah, you know, people like us do meet on a regular basis, we do talk, and we are friends. So yeah, that was just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, could we take another question?
Hi, wonderful discussion. So I'm Mehul Sangrajka from the Jain faith, and it was mentioned a couple of times, so thank you. So 2 quick questions. I love the slide because it reminded me of how I grew up. You know, religion was just part of what you did, it wasn't your identity. I think the problem we have today is religion is your identity. That identity is owned by institutions. So you belong to this, you know, Gurudwara or this church or this, and, you know, which are split tremendously. And that identity also comes from a history of conflict and conversion, which I think in itself brings problems. So you've now got into that. And then, and I wonder whether that is why we've got to where we've got to. And then the second question is that the reason so many young people are leaving formal religion? And you mentioned the churches, but it's common everywhere. I mean, I've seen, you know, tags which say spiritual but not religious. And that's a growing movement. And is that why they're leaving formal institutionalized religion, because they don't like the tags and the history that it brings, its baggage?
Yes, okay, lovely. Do you want to tackle one of the 2 questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Opinderjit.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. In terms of institutions, I'm very much of the opinion that there's a whole threat here to the continuation of physical buildings. More and more youngsters, from what I see, engage with their faith online. So in terms of Sikhi especially, that's a huge threat to the Gurdwaras, in my opinion, because it's at the Gurdwara that we have our darshan, we have our relationship with our Guru. And so for me, you know, and the same with many other Dharmic faiths as well, you know, in 50, 60 years' time, you know, who are going to be the custodians of those places of worship? And if we lose our institutions, if we lose our physical buildings, where is that dialogue going to take place? Is it going to take place in isolated spaces where there's nobody else giving their opinion, but it's going to be very tunnel vision? The whole point is dialogue in places like this is that we learn from one another. We don't debate, because here there's no winner, there's no loser. We just come in to share each other's opinions.
Yeah, and do you have one more questions on the why we come and stick with the identity, how that's come from? Yeah, and then the last one, yeah.
Can I just show off about having the first Jain temple built in the world outside of India in Leicester, please? Because it's a magnificent place. And yeah, very proud to have
a converted church.
Yeah. Yes, of course, with poor parking.
Yes, exactly. No parking.
No, not at all. I'm seeing push and pull.
Yes.
I'm seeing on the one hand those who are young people who are frankly fed up and saying they're fed up of this. There's too much excess. There's too many boundaries. There's a tie-in. We're told on one hand we have freedom, liberty. On the other hand, we're having restrictions, and there's a gradual peeling away. Some of it's official. Some of it's just gradually. Let's just walk away from the formality of that. Or on the other hand, I'm seeing a hardening of views which are even much stricter interpretation than even the great-grandparents, for example. And there's a sort of reawakening identity around that, around belief. And I think that's those push and pull factors are quite concerning, because you know, we're going to have to try and drag people into the centre ground. We were talking about it earlier on, weren't we? How do we have that context for the world that we are in now? And the world that we are in now is plurality. We've got to recalibrate our identities so that we can live in peace and in harmony with one another. And I think that's one of the key challenges of our time. How do we contextualize that belief system for the world that we're in? Because if we carry on the way we are, a colleague at the back, I think, raised a very good point on there, then it creates that superiority complex. And that's something that we can challenge externally, but also we have to challenge it internally.
Thank you so much. And I'm afraid we are running out of time. And first and foremost, thank you everyone here for sharing your thoughts. And I think this conversation helped us renew our confidence in the faith, not in the naive optimism sense, but I think it's in the sense that we understand the issue of the interfaith better, like the challenge that they have, and also the next step, what kind of work that we need to do more, the connections, the groundwork, rather than have a banner and say we will do interfaith work, but put interfaith in something that is part of life at different environment. They will experience that to the point that it's not, the faith is not a solid identity, that I have 5 identity and one of it is my faith, and something that I hold wholeheartedly before I get in touch with someone. But it's something that's hybrid, as you say. It depends on context that we work along, and also the more we define things, especially with ism, with like who are you, and the structure that behind it, in the way of the religion is taught and is described within the institution and society that we are living now. I think this is something that a challenge that we need to move on, even though the work of interfaith itself. Because the interfaith work can easily go into that narrative as well, to hopefully to solve the problem of what we are having, but use that language to solve that problem doesn't solve the problem. And while we keep doing so, we still see that the overall narrative and the climate hasn't declined, and then we lose our motivation and confidence within interfaith. So I think that we have lived a lot of things, and I hope that you regain your confidence again within interfaith and have a clear set of toolkits to consider it when you encounter things. Thank you so much for coming to the event, and I will let you go very soon. And everything that you see here, we are a charity first, and if you want to support us, you can follow us on LinkedIn, and if you want to stay closer and engage to our work, you can become our member. We'll be here. Our member, you can see the card on the tables, and within that member card, if you become our member, you can have access to our private roundtables. We also have a private roundtable regularly where we don't publish it outside. Second is you can also use our space. If you come to the second floor, we have a lovely working space that I'm sure that all the speakers can confirm to you. It's a good working space, beautiful one, that you can come and use it. So if you become a member, feel free to come and use them. And our next K lecture will be at the end of March, and we will promote it on Eventbrite very soon. So please stay tuned and see what kind of topic it is. It will not be allowed in the faith, I promise you. But thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you.